So let's begin our study of Solomon's Song of Songs. You'll hear me call it a lot of times in this study just the song to give it some shorthand so that I can keep on moving. It's a lot of syllables. I'm going to wear out my jaw. Now, the first verse of the Song of Songs gives us the title, Solomon's Song of Songs. This can be taken a couple of different ways. Some people have seen it as being a little like the Holy of Holies, the holiest place in the world, the most, even among the other holy places, this is the most holy. Even among the other songs, this is the greatest song. Solomon wrote about 1,005 songs according to the Bible, and so this could be seen as the greatest song of those 1,005 songs. Some other people have seen here a reference to a song, one song made up of many songs. And that's very clear that throughout this song there are movements, there's shifts in the point of view, shifts in the ideas being communicated. So perhaps that is right. We can't quite tell. It is helpful to me to see it as a single song in many movements, and maybe those movements, as is true in most music, were brought together by the composer to help build something out of different pieces that he wrote at different times. That's entirely possible. Whenever it says Solomon's Song of Songs, there's a couple of different ideas that come to mind too. Is it written about Solomon? Is it written by Solomon? Is it written for Solomon? This idea of the ownership of the song. Traditionally, of course, it's written by Solomon. Ancient Jewish tradition says that Solomon wrote this song in his youth. He wrote Proverbs in his middle years, and he wrote Ecclesiastes in his old age. And it's easy to see how the concerns of each of those three pieces corresponds with those different age groups. In this particular case, we see in Solomon a passion, an energy, concerns that are more suited to a young man. So it's very easy to see how this could be the case. As we look at it, we begin thinking about, though, the fact that the song is actually written from the feminine point of view. The bride speaks much more than the groom in this song. Her thoughts, her dreams, her emotions are all very well communicated, whereas Solomon, we basically hear his words. So it's interesting that we are approaching it from the female point of view. But as we approach it, we read that first verse, we get the title of the Song of Songs. The song then continues with what I think of as the first movement that takes place in the first 4 verses. The bride speaks. She says this. She says, "Let him kiss me with the kisses of his mouth. For your love is better than wine. Your anointing oils are fragrant. Your name is oil poured out. Therefore virgins love you. Draw me after you. Let us run. The king has brought me into his chambers." Immediately when we begin this song, we see an expression of intimacy. Let him kiss me with the kisses of his mouth. 1,000 years ago, Bernard of Clairvaux was writing messages based on the Song of Songs, and he was approaching it as an expression of love between Christ and the church. The bride speaks, that's the church speaking about the groom who would be Christ. And so this, in his opinion, was a cry for intimacy between the church and Christ, the church wanting to be close to Christ, to connect with him. Let him kiss me with the kisses of his mouth. I want to be as close to Christ as I can get. The idea that for so many centuries, the groom in this song represented God or Christ gives us the idea that we can approach this like a very holy, a very sacred, a very good thing. So when the bride says, "Let him kiss me with the kisses of his mouth," we can see immediately that the desire for intimacy is something that's very good in a romantic married relationship. We should always remember that when we approach this song, we are talking about a marriage. Now, the marriage may happen during the song, but we are talking about people who are expressing their love for each other in the context of marriage. That is the biblical paradigm. It condemns this kind of intimacy outside marriage and holds marriage up as the ultimate place where it should and could be expressed. So as she approaches him and says, let him kiss me with the kisses of his mouth. Your love is better than wine. She's saying his love for me is intoxicating. It makes me dizzy. It lifts my spirits the way wine would. And of course, these days we have songs that even still say that. Her kisses are sweeter than wine. And those ideas, they come from a place like this. His name to her is something that's sweet, something that's beautiful. It's like oil poured out. It just kind of smoothly rolls off the tongue, his name does. And for her, she says, therefore the virgins love you. Now, this being a discussion about Solomon, we know that Solomon had many, many wives, more than is reasonable. And even at this early stage of his kingdom, if we are to take it that way, the later part of the Song of Songs says that he had 140 wives and concubines in his harem already. But the bride is taking this in stride. That's a very difficult thing for the modern West. We don't like to think about the idea of polygamy and its relationship to the scriptures. We do have to acknowledge, though, that the scriptures never condemn polygamy, and the Bible gives us some guidelines about how it ought to be practiced. Now, Solomon clearly stepped out of all those guidelines, but it is very hard for people today, and especially women today, to hear this bride say, well, of course other women love him. Of course they do. She sees the beauty of his name, the desirability of his kisses and his embraces as something that would naturally be attractive to other women. So she's not really surprised that the virgins love him. And she says to him, draw me after you. Let us run. She wants to get away together with him. She wants to be alone with him. She wants to just have him to herself. So that running, we get the sense of energy, the sense of urgency that she has in wanting to make this relationship strong and just to have every opportunity she can to be one-on-one with him. Now, the very end of this verse, it says, the king has brought me into his chambers, and immediately we might think, well, this marriage is already about to be consummated. But that's not necessarily the case. When we think about the ancient Near East, think about Esther, for example. She was taken into the king's harem, taken into the queen's palace, as it were, a year before they were married. And she spent that first year with cosmetic treatments and oil baths and different things that were to make her more queenly, things that were to prepare her to not look like a rustic, to not look like somebody that just came in off the street, but somebody that was prepared to be the consort of the king. In ancient Egypt, it's discussed how you could expect to find any number of women in the women's palace. It would be older women, younger women, some of the king's wives and concubines, of course, but also his sisters, his mother, his aunts. Even infant boys would be in the women's quarters. So there would be a separate palace that would be designated for the women of the court. And so what we see here is this bride of Solomon being brought in, given her own rooms, her own apartment, as it were, among the women. And she's being brought in. She's being given a place in preparation for the wedding that's about to come. As we continue the song, we see a response. This is the virgins that are spoken of in the previous section and the first chorus of the song. We will exult and rejoice in you. We will extol your love more than wine. Again, that sense of intoxication. And this idea that the other women in the court, the other women in the queen's palace, are seeing this relationship something special. Solomon's wives were mostly diplomatic marriages. He would marry a relative of a neighboring king in order to bring peace between the kingdoms. And we're told that very clearly. He loved some of these women, I really believe that. But I think that this particular situation shows us a dynamic, a facet of love in relationships that perhaps even Solomon was unfamiliar with. He sees something special here. And the other people in the song see something very special here. They see this love as being elevated, extolled, and something to be deeply, deeply desired. So we hear here for the first time this chorus of women. Now, who these women are is a matter for some debate. Virgins, it says in the previous section, and maybe that's who's singing here. The daughters of Jerusalem, they're called in some other places, and that could be a number of things. It could be the other women of the city of Jerusalem. I tend to think that it's the other women in the women's palace there, so it could be some of Solomon's wives or concubines. Other women like the bride here who are awaiting a marriage with the king. And especially this latter group, these people who would see this young woman being brought into the palace and being prepared for a marriage as saying, our day might come. And so we see an exchange between the two. We see them saying, oh, your love is so magnificent. But every once in a while, the bride gives some advice to them, and we'll see that as the time comes. And the bride responds to this chorus. They're going, your love is so magnificent. We lift it up. This is something elevated. And the bride responds, rightly do they love you. Again, that sense that this man is so wonderful. This man is beautiful. This man is powerful. This man is something to be deeply desired. And it's no real surprise to me that these women desire my groom, which, Solomon had so many wives at this point, 140 women, that it wasn't a surprise to her. She didn't resent it. She saw it as a natural thing. But we jump right into the first movement, these first 4 verses of the song, with the bride speaking her heart. I want to be close to him. His name is so attractive to me. He is so attractive to me. Our love is something special. And the women in the chorus responding, yes, it is something special. And this tells us something about God's design for love between a man and his wife, between a woman and her husband, that it is to be something special, that they are to appreciate each other, that they are to desire intimacy and to approach their marriage with energy and desire. A beautiful thing that God is laying out for us here in the first movement of Solomon's Song of Songs.